We in the information age, and really what that means, it's oversaturated. Like podcasting the rap scene, it's confusing. Whether you going live or you Zoom, when you ain't on the same page, so you read what the room thinks, and the room thinks too many words, and every word is personal. When it's in type, it's even worse. You misunderstood. That's just how it works. So I'm a hypocrite, just like the rest of the earth. And racists think you hate them, so they gotta hate you first. If there's such a nation, it's a crumb. The melting pot is an urn. They want us normal and ignorable, kindling to burn. Sexism ain't no two-way street. Listen to her. And slut ain't got no use. It's an excuse for a slur. Don't blame it on the evil. It's just people who hurt. You get what you got, whether or not you deserve. You gotta explain it all, even the obvious word. Welcome to the Museum of Dead Words. I'm your tour guide, Dyalekt, alongside Pamela Capalad, Christian Crouch, Andrew J. Scoville, and Isagani Kushner. We spent the last few years pouring through conversations online to find words that kill discussions and ruin discourse. We dub these words dead and have been infiltrating art galleries, co-working spaces, cafes, anywhere we can get to show how these words died and why it matters. In the online series, we spend a week with each word with Blueprints in Progress on Tuesdays, where we get deep into how a word dies, and on Thursdays with the main event, which is a collaboration with artists from around the world to share their experiences with these words. Today is a special case because we've been flibbity-gibbiting and, we had elections and all sorts of other things that have obviously impeded our path. We're having a special Saturday edition where we're combining the Blueprints in Progress and our interview with our artist, Elizabeth Starkey. If you know a word or phrase that has died or may be in danger, please share in chat, add to the Dead Word Bucket, or reach out to us on museumofdeadwords.com. Find us any way you can. A little about the museum. We opened when your mouths did, and thanks to the generous contribution of millions of donors like you, we've been able to identify and catalog a growing list of words that have fallen into disuse. In the English language, it's kind of hard to tell when a word has stopped working. Being English, these words tend to colonize conversations and then kind of sit there, festering, letting tone and context do all the work. Sometimes these words die, and it takes generations for anyone to notice. That's when words get dangerous, as words only become weapons when they cease to function as tools, and their wits get sharper in direct proportion to the dulling of their meaning. You know what I'm saying? He knows what I'm saying. Some words in this museum, like normal and deserve, were killed to build a tacit agreement, an implied cosign, so that permission is granted and no further questions are asked. That cosign and this next word has become a powerful tool of the anti-intellectual. Good night, good night. Everybody watching, say good night to the boy. He's got to go down. The next word that we're going to be going into is obvious/obviously. It was born in 1580-ish and died somewhere around 2012, circa 2012. The meaning is frequently met with. That was an obsolete old school meaning. And the more useful meaning that we use today goes back to in the way, plain to see, or evident. It's recorded from the 1630s as predictable and lacking in subtlety. That two-pronged definition, which has a number of different emotional feelings attached to them, has a lot to do with how the word was birthed and how it died. Obvious basically breaks down into these three categories. Something that is obvious is observable, measurable, or I know in the definition there it says predictable, but I like better replicatable or replicatable, or is it replicable? I'm not sure which one of them, but it's fun to say it like that. The duality of meanings is really interesting in that they don't appear to be contradictory, but the problem is that they're not even necessarily complementary. That can be argued forever in the abstract, and let me tell you, in all of my research that I did, people did way too much of that. This is a word where the meaning and the implications of the word have a lot to do with the direction of the word, just as much as the usage of the word itself. So let's go back in a time into the places where usage of the word spiked and what was going around. So in 1963, not 1963, I was talking about that's when it dropped. In 1893, I'm all over the place with my dates today. In 1893, there was a huge depression and a huge drop in the usage of the word. Cutting other things that's causing making noises. Huge droppage in the usage of the word, and I'm going to pull up a few things to show y'all what's going on. So, in case you weren't aware of where the term hobo bag comes from, it comes from hobos carrying a bag. Americans in 1893, according to Vassar, they experienced the Depression in markedly different ways. In the bitter winter months, poor families starved and became wanderers. The tramps crisscross the countryside, working or hiding on freight trains, appearing at the back doors of middle-class houses, pleading for worker food. A lot of Americans blame people who couldn't find work, accusing them of being lazy or beggars. Some amongst the unemployed blame themselves. And if you read the newspapers, there are a lot of stories of despair and suicide. It ran almost daily. A lot of people in the richer classes, they were afraid of violence. They were afraid of anarchy. They were afraid about these bitter labor conflicts, the Homestead strike, at Carnegie Steelworks, the Pullman strike in Chicago. It captured the nation's attention before and during the Depression. In these situations, many Americans that consider themselves respectable, they blame the violence on strikers, although other people sympathize with them. In 1896, they had this in the political cartoons in the ways that things looked. I have it all here and you don't see me, so you can see it bigger. It's talking about the abolition of one prong of the pitchfork, finance monopoly, the next part in the middle, transportation monopoly, and the third part, land monopoly. It was very obvious and it was very clear to people what they were interested in, what was important. The next peak I thought was mad interesting. This was what I was just saying earlier, in the late 1960s, 1967, around 1968, which coincided with the rise of the word duh. Now, duh has been used for a really long time, and it was mostly used to denote someone being stupider, someone being less articulate. It was used in Merry Melodies with Bugs Bunny in them, and it was also used in the 50s with, it was in the 40s with Merry Melodies, and the 50s with Archie comics, very popular with the character Moose. Duh, what I talk to. You can know when you hear someone type, or you see someone type duh, you hear duh with that tone to it. And duh became not just a word that denoted someone being stupid, but also a word that denoted that the listener was stupid for not understanding or agreeing, because everybody in 1967, 1968 kind of knew what was going on or felt they knew what was going on. And this was evidenced by things like how the public reacted to the King riots. Now, here is a newspaper political cartoon talking about how the media is saying, you see, it says white news media, we should have the right to dissent, versus white news media saying we must have law and order, which brings us back to what we were doing on the first week with Hypocrite. If you want to go back and check out the things that we have, I believe the YouTube channel has them in perpetuity, but I think the other places let them go. A few other political cartoons that talk about the issues that were going on in 1968. Similar today, people talking about if we don't have it our way, it's rigged. Talking about how protesters and activists are preventing freedom of speech. They say freedom of preventing speech. Even says that they're activists and not listeners, not in tune with the rest of the unspoken audience. And more fun stuff. This isn't necessarily as tied to the what we were talking about with obvious, but I thought that it was really interesting that we've had a problem with how we did our primary system and the Electoral College for longer than I think a lot of us believe that we do. They may not have agreed with each other, but they were certain of how they felt. The next big spike was in 1992. It was a huge one again, and the phrase was "the economy, stupid." They didn't actually say obvious. The obvious was implied. It was coined by James Carville for Bill Clinton's campaign, and it was directed at workers, and it was intended to be one of the three main messages they focused on for the campaign. Funny enough, it's the only one you remember if you remember anything about that campaign. The other two were change versus more of the same, which is a nice rhyme, but doesn't actually get you anywhere. And don't forget healthcare, which I guess everybody did until now. The next peak was in 2012, and this was the beginning of its death. It's a little difficult to decide between 2012 and like 2016, 2017, but somewhere in that range, the word died, and the word and the meaning and the ability to understand it kind of died as we got into what is known not only as the social media and our technology and our CGI, but deep fakes. Here's a deep fake of Mona Lisa and Dali. And I forget the name of that painting, so I'm not an art history guy, but they are moving and they're paintings and they still look like the same thing. When I was looking through the history of deep fakes, there are a lot of interesting ones where they put a celebrity on a politician's face or vice versa or something like that. But all of these becoming more and more plausible. And mind you, folks are laughing at the deep fakes they see, the fake commercials, the fake videos, the bad graffiti that folks are doing. And all while we're laughing at it, they're using these things as experiments and getting better and better. So this is how these words died. But like, why? The reality is that people don't like feeling stupid. And when we've been told that accepting correction is a mark of stupidity, we won't accept being corrected. So when we are corrected, instead of introspection, then we have snark. Oh, that's snart, Leonard Snart, Captain Cold. I meant snark, Captain Obvious. Captain Obvious was very interesting for me to be researching because Captain Obvious isn't really obvious in terms of its origin. There are people who talk about it coming out in the 90s because there are a lot of YA books that made the joke about Captain Obvious. And I even found this one forum where this cat from 1983 swear him and his friends in a California improv group invented the character. And it was a funny character, Captain Obvious, who went around doing things and explaining what was obvious, and that it spread all across America from their own improv. I'm not sure which one of those actually happened, but the idea that we must dismiss comically any correction or any simple laying out of what the facts are led us down this road. The other thing I was saying about obvious, it was observable, right? All those last few things were observable. This is where it gets measurable. In the website Dina May, Johan Balin described a few different reactions to things being obvious. It's obvious because I'm smarter than you. It's like a power play. Whatever you say, I already have the preemptive thought. I don't even have to listen. It's obvious because I don't have a clue what you're talking about. It confused me, so I'm just going to move on to something else because I don't get it, and I don't want you to know that I don't get it. The often used one, it's obvious because I don't want to talk about it. I resist without giving you further information. It's obvious because I wish I would have come up with that. So sometimes we're hiding behind it. In general, it's obvious buts because it becomes obvious for other people and not obvious for ourselves. And the conclusion that this cat came with that I really dug is that labeling things as obvious makes us stop thinking. We assume that we've already understood everything there is to understand about this object, question, or person. It's an intellectual and creative dead end. So let's move beyond the dead ends. Let's get somewhere where we can do some, I said replicatable or replicatable, however you want to pronounce it, instead of predictable, because that brings up science, right? You know, you try to replicate experiments in science. And I found a really interesting science experiment about obvious that I would like to drag y'all through. So there was this, there's a great article about it by Fiona McDonald of sciencealert.com. The article is titled, "There's Evidence That Humans Didn't Actually See Blue Until Recently." And what they did is they went to Namibia and found the Himba tribe, where there is no word for blue and no real distinction between green and blue, even though they have many different words for different shades of blue. And they asked them to do a test I'm going to ask y'all to do right now. They had a picture that they put up of 11 squares. Most of them were green. One of them, obviously, is blue. And they asked the people who spoke that language, the Himba folks, if they could discern which one the blue one was. For the most part, they couldn't. They guessed and they tried and worked around, but it wasn't clear to them. It wasn't obvious at all. Wondering why they had so many different words for different variations and gradations of green, they added another test where they asked people to look at a number of different greens together and decide which was the different green. One of these greens is a completely different shade. Look right now. Tell me, guess. If you guys are there and have commentability and have logged into whatever you've logged in on that, please feel free to let me know which one you think it is. And stop thinking, do your guess and decide now, because I'm going to show you which one it is. Was it that one? Was it that one you saw? Most of the people who spoke the Himba language were able to figure it out fairly quickly. Again, they had a lot of different words for these different types of greens, so they had an understanding of these different types of greens. Most English speakers and speakers of languages where they don't have lots of words for green, but they do have for blue, they had trouble finding it. I asked colleagues, friends, and family to look at these, and I hadn't found a single person who could find it. Even after looking at it, like look back, look again. Can you see it? Is it there? Is it real? It's hard to tell. So one of the things about this is obvious often means I'm smarter than you. And that means I'm better than you. So folks will say stuff like, at the risk of stating the obvious, like kind of apology for something that you're going to say in case the hearer might think that you're insulting their intelligence. People have even said that only a fool states the obvious. So this now allows us to not share things that Maybe people need to know by assuming that everybody else knows. That's how biases get kept where they're going. And that's how things don't get challenged. I mean, things like, as we talk about replicating science experiments, the alpha wolf study, which if y'all know about studies in alpha wolves and things like that, it's not a real thing. The alpha wolf is really just the parent. But people believe that that worked out, obviously, so they roll with it. Let's bring it to something that many people believe, if not obvious, has always been there. Sexuality. Sexuality is something that today seems constantly in flux. Everybody's identifying as this thing or that thing. And what does that mean? You know, for hundreds of years, we've all always been straight or we've been other, and it's been that paradigm forever, but not really. There's a book called The Surprisingly Short History of Sexuality. It's by Hannah Blank, and she posits that, well, posits, like the whole book is about how sexuality as an identity is such a recent thing that we don't even understand. In 1901, Dorland's Medical Dictionary defined heterosexuality as an abnormal or perverted appetite toward the opposite sex. More than 20 years later, in 1923, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defined it as a morbid sexual passion for one of the opposite sex. It wasn't until 1934 that heterosexuality was defined as meaning the manifestation of sexual passion for one of the opposite sex. Normal sexuality. Yeah, normal sexuality. We talked about normal a couple of weeks ago, so we won't go back into it. According to this book, prior to 1868, there were no heterosexuals. Neither were there homosexuals. It hadn't yet occurred to humans, this is Hannah's words, that there might be differentiated from one another by the kinds of love and sexual desire they experience. Now, sexual behaviors, now they were identified and cataloged, and sometimes they were forbidden. But the emphasis was always on the act and not the agent. So in the late 1860s, Hungarian journalist Karl Maria Kirkbeny coined 4 terms to describe sexual experiences: heterosexual, homosexual, and 2 other terms that people aren't really using anymore, and that's monosexual and heterogenic. Monosexual meant masturbating, or for British people, wankers, and heterogenic meant bestiality. Kirkbeny used the term heterosexual when he was writing a book chapter arguing for the decriminalization of homosexuality. So there's the point about the identity being tied to not only your self-efficacy, but also your agency and the legality of your existence. It actually wasn't used by the publisher. They declined to use that part and help him endorse that. But the term started getting used later by his publisher in other books published, and it kind of grew from there. This is how we get to the places where Black people are depicted in medical books as being lazy, scary, giant, scary, monstrous thugs. I said scary twice for effect. We've seen that in media. We've seen that in our books. We've seen that in the common sense things that people say. So when people go into hospitals, Black people are seen as having less pain. Black people are being seen as people who would lie to get more drugs. And there's a study by the American Psychological Association that found that police officers in California saw Black kids as larger, older, and less innocent than white kids just from looking at their pictures, often exaggerating the size and the age of these students in their head. Let's finish this up because, you know, today's that special edition we want to run this interview to, and I want to get out of your way. I know I'll be talking too much and want y'all to hear Elizabeth Starkey and the great things she's been doing with the work that she's got. So let's finish up my talk with money. Patent law. Do you guys know about patent law and how obvious relates to patent law? If you've ever tried to patent something, I'm assuming you will. Let's pull this up. So there are 4 legal requirements to get a patent. Is your invention useful? Is your invention a machine, a process, a manufacture, or a composition? 3, is your invention new? And 4, is your invention obvious? They want to make sure that it's not obvious. It's the non-obvious requirement, which makes a lot of sense, and it's a really great thing. And I found this scary but real study and report from UCLA Law Review, where they talk about for more than 60 years, obviousness has set the bar for patentability. Under the standard, if a hypothetical person is having an ordinary skill set in the art would find an invention obvious in light of the existent relevant information, then the invention cannot be patented. This skilled person is defined as a non-innovative worker with a limited knowledge base. The more creative and informed the skilled person, the more likely an invention will be considered obvious. The standard has evolved since its introduction, and it's now on the verge of an evolutionary leap. You see, inventive machines are increasingly being used in research, and once the use of such machines becomes a standard, the person skilled in the art should be a person using an inventive machine, or maybe they're just an inventive machine. Unlike the skilled person, the inventive machine is capable of innovation and considering the entire universe of prior art. As inventive machines continue to improve, this will increasingly raise the bar to patentability, eventually rendering innovative activities obvious. The end of obviousness means the end of patents, at least as they are now. And that's how a word dies. So I'm going to move on to the next segment. Usually when we do our Blueprints in Progress, we then have our interviews and our sharing of our artwork on the next day. It's usually on the Thursdays, I was saying before in the intro. Since we're doing our special Saturday, I'm going to share the interview that I did with Elizabeth Starkey. And let me get my screen sharing going on. Right now, the work that she's doing is an optical illusion that we don't actually have yet. It is still in progress because we're still working on the things we're working on. But I'm going to share with you the works that we have in progress and what Elizabeth's been working on in her career. So check it out and I'll talk to y'all again in a minute.
Random people interrupt.
Well, it's okay if random people interrupt us. We're doing our thing. I did a show in, I think, 2011. It was right over, I was like 2 blocks from Occupy Wall Street. And there were folks who were just walking by. Some people were members of Occupy, onlookers, journalists. And they would get in the middle of my show because we were out on the street acting on the street. So I would have to improv around people like that. So it's fun. The party. Hey, everybody. Now we have our interview portion of today's process with Elizabeth Starkey. What's going on? How are you doing today?
All right. How are you?
I'm doing well. So tell us a little bit about your art, where your art comes from, why you're doing it, why you do the things you do.
Well, I have a pretty broad range of types of projects that I approach. I would call myself more of like a mixed media kind of artist because I do everything from video to like this brand new sculptural thing that I'm working on. I do everything from art direction, design, video, animation, illustration. So very, very broad range of things that I work on. So I'm actually working on setting up a stop motion studio right now. And hopefully that will be a bigger focus in my work. I have always been very interested in sort of optical illusions and kind of messing with the way that people perceive things. And that's kind of where I ended up with this project that I'm working on now.
Oh, yeah. So with the museum, you're working on an optical illusion about what's obvious and the word obviously. Can you tell us about what was your idea behind it and what's the process been like? Because I know it's been an interesting process.
Yeah, so previously I had done a piece a while back that was kind of inspired. What are you calling here? So it kind of inspired this in a bit of a way where it was a 3D word that had paint on it that kind of obscured what it was. So depending on, you had to like really look at it to see what it was saying. So this is kind of like that same sort of idea where you have to look at the piece in a certain way in order to reveal its message.
Like a little bit of magic eye kind of stuff.
Kind of, except you don't have to have the special ability that some people have to be able to see those things.
Yo, I felt so much for Kubiak and Mallrats because I can never see the magic eye.
Really?
I think it's a lie. I think people are just trying to mess with me. Maybe I've got some sort of color blindness that doesn't allow me to see past the things that they got going on. But yeah, I don't believe in it.
It's possible. I think those were popular when I was around in like 2nd or 3rd grade or something. And I remember it took me like weeks and determination in order to be able to finally see those things. So I can do it, but you know, they're very 90s.
Yeah, well, I was bringing it up because it's like when you talk about optical illusion, that's often the kind of thing that comes
Yeah.
up. And what you're doing is not that. It's not like you're hiding something behind
Right.
something.
Yeah, this is more of like I would say an analog optical illusion, where it's physically created in space, as opposed to, I guess that those magic eye things are digitally made. They must be digitally made. And so yeah, so this is more of like you can kind of move around the space that it's in, and see it from different perspectives. So, unlike the magic eye, everybody can see what's going to happen. You don't have to do whatever you do to your eyes for those things. It's it will physically manifest depending on where you are in the space.
Right. So like it doesn't matter about your concentration, as long as you go to the right place, it's going to change the perspective.
Exactly.
It's not a magic trick.
Exactly. Yes. It's a matter of perspective, really, which is a lot about obviousness as well. As it's your perspective definitely influences how obvious something might be.
Oh man, you're giving me juicy stuff. I kind of want to go into stuff about the word, but I also still want to know a little bit more about your work and why. So let's kind of try to cheat and do both. I love this idea of obvious being a matter of perspective, and that's definitely what I found in my research. That the idea of things being obvious, you get two people who swear that the complete opposite perspectives are completely obvious. So. I was talking last week a lot about art and criticism, how art inherently can be criticism. Is the obviousness being a perspective thing a big part of your work?
I mean, I would say yes for this, because you could stand in a room with this piece and not ever go to the correct spots to see it, and it might be obvious to you that it's just a bunch of it's just like a piece of wood with some sticks sticking out of it. That's your obvious perspective, right? If you're like in the corner and you never go to see it the way that I intended it to be seen. Or if you go and you look at this thing, you're like, oh, what is this? And you walk around it and it reveals itself to you what it's supposed to be. Then it's obvious that it was meant to act in that way. So yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Well, I just really love how that speaks to both expertise and your intended audience, right?
Exactly.
Because I think that what's great about obvious and what can be useful about the word is that in group, it can be a very good way to create some shorthand, to create sarcasm, to create some cathartic types of comedy, those types of things. And when it's analog and it puts you in this room, you get to be tested a little bit. I remember I was at this art exhibit, not similar to yours, but with a similar vibe or like thought process behind it, where it was this beautiful varied styles. It was mixed media stuff. There was some video installation, some paintings and all that. And then the challenge was they had invited all the big money people to have a fancy party. And at the end, they revealed these mystery artists that did all the work were sex workers.
Yeah.
And there was this conversation that people were having about how people's opinions and the thoughts of the value of these works were different when it was a mystery artist and whether it was someone who came from a place where the qualities mattered, That's like last week with Deserve, we talked a lot about the quality of a person having the qualities of a person counting as the quality of a person and how much they matter or how much their work matters has a lot to do with the way that you see them.
Exactly. Yes, for sure. Yeah. And it's a matter of so many different things. Like I know a lot of galleries, for example, won't even consider displaying your art if you don't have an MFA and all this stuff. And, it's like, oh, you're not a serious artist if you don't have an MFA. But then there's like amazing museums, like in Baltimore, there's the American Museum of Visionary Art, I believe is the correct way of saying it. And it basically focuses on artists that are not properly trained. And it's one of my favorite museums because it's so different than what you would see if you were going to, Chelsea, any gallery in Chelsea, for example. It's kind of like the artists are led more by their passion as opposed to like being correct. And I find that difficult for me with things like as a designer. So right now, this studio that I'm setting up, I'm trying to design my own logo, and I'm having the hardest time because I've designed, I don't know, I couldn't tell you how many logos I've designed in my life, a lot of logos. And as a designer, I'm having the worst, most difficult time designing a logo for my own studio because I don't know, I feel like I'm holding myself to such a high standard having that knowledge that I have. So I feel like I almost feel like people who don't know the proper way of doing things are a little luckier because they don't have to deal with all that stuff rattling around their heads and influencing their decisions.
Well, I really love the thing you said, and I think this has something to do with your problem with the logo is about your passion versus being correct.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we start making art because we feel like there's this burning need in our chest. It's like, I've got to do this thing. People need to listen to this, my idea and my thought. And then as you get better at it and you start knowing what's going on, you're like, okay, I put this color on next to this sound and do this thing with my hand. And now I know what's going to happen for me.
Right.
And you're like, okay, so should I work backwards from the end point? And it's funny because sometimes people will be on the commercial thing, but it's not always about money. It's about accomplishing the thing that you want your work to do. It's like, okay, should I work backwards and make sure that the logo for my studio exactly explains all of the things I know will do in their head, or do I want to feel like me?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's there's so many different ways of thinking about it. And, there's not really one absolute correct way. And I think just especially just I just have too much that I know, but also the side of me that is like, I kind of want to just reject those things that I know and be able to really get across that this is, this is a creative endeavor. It's not so much like a, proper business, rigid, kind of thing. I don't know. It's very challenging for me to do a logo for myself.
No, I feel you. Whenever it comes to doing any creative works on top of my own, it's really hard to do. And I think what you're saying too, it speaks to, I don't remember where I got this quote from, but there's somebody who said that art is equal parts math and magic. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. You kind of juggle those things to make it feel right, to also making it look right. Even like as a designer, because I've done like little bits. I'm not like a real for real designer, but I've made me a flyer or an album cover too. Yeah. There's that thing where everything will be perfectly centered, but because of how brains work, it looks off center, and you need to nudge those words over just like a couple of centimeters, even though it's not off, to the eye it looks right. And that's
Yeah, it's like this OCD versus like your visual intuition. Because if I'm in Photoshop, sometimes I don't trust center. If I'm aligning it digitally, like having Photoshop pick the center, like I won't trust it. Like sometimes I will actually nudge the pixels over and count them, and then it still doesn't look right. So then I just have to be like, okay, I'm just going to do what feels right, because nobody else is going to count my pixels. I'm the only person.
Nobody else is going to count your pixels. It's really ill how as technology makes it more accessible for all of us to engage in the math part of art, it causes glitches in the magic part of the brain as you're trying to do it at the same time. On that, so wait, can we, I know we have a piece of what you've been working on for Obviously with you that shows a little bit about the work between the math and the magic.
Sure, yeah. Oh, the math on this was interesting. So I'll show you what I've got.
Yeah, show it off.
So this is essentially, so far, it's a palette with wood, a piece of wood on top of it. And then I've drilled holes into it to kind of support holes, such as this one. It's a PVC pipe. And so, yeah, they're going to go, the poles will go in the holes.
Yes, this is great.
So, yeah, so you can, I'll show you, like, I made some mistakes while I was doing it because I don't know what I'm doing with wood. And so, like, you can see here, wait, it's really hard to tell where I'm pointing the thing because it's kind of like opposite your mirror effect.
Yeah, I know the opposite thing, but yeah, we're seeing here, you've got it.
Yeah,
the
so
white part
here,
we fill it in.
I had to fill that in. So I was initially going to have a row go across here, and you can see like I measured, like this is very gridded out, and I had to kind of change plans as I was doing it because I didn't realize that I wouldn't be able to drill through the piece that's kind of supporting the center there. So kind of in the middle of making it, I had to be like, oh, oops. So, and then I got my initial grid, and I realized that it may not be enough surface area to convey the image, the word that is going to be seen. So then I had to add another row that's kind of like hacked in there. It's still like all measured out and even, but it's a little different than I was expecting it was going to be, because I'm kind of playing it by ear as far as the math goes. So there's an example of our magic versus math.
Ooh. Yo, so playing it by ear as far as the math goes, that sounds terrifying to me. This is why I'm a word person and not the image person, because I remember when I would first just try to draw bubble letter words.
Yeah.
And, you make the first two letters mad big, and then you start looking at the rest of the page, and you're like, oh no, there's not enough room for 6 more letters on this page.
Yeah.
I needed to measure that out. So this is kind of what you got going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I did the grid to begin with, because that kind of at least gave me a place to work around. So even though the initial center hole, that's like the first hole that I attempted to drill. Even though that particular hole ended up not working out, at least I was able to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, well, how can I make this work without trashing this thing? And yeah, I have some like wood putty stuff, and I stuck it in that hole, and I'm gonna make it work. Yeah, my next big concern is how I'm gonna get these poles to kind of stay rotationally where they need to be, as well as to stay upright. So this right here is a 10-foot pole, and it's obviously
right. Yeah, it's already.
And like you can see, the hole is actually pretty tight. If I can get the camera to, where are we here? Yeah. So the hole. Well, sorry, that's a little weird, but so the hole's pretty tight. So my plan is to drill some holes into the poles, like in the bottom, and then
so the holes for the poles that go in the holes.
There will be more holes in the poles. And I got these little they're like, I think they're called hook screws. So it's like a screw, and the end of it, instead of being like a screw, with like a, what do you call it, a Phillips head, whatever. It goes into a hook. So then there will be more. There will be even more holes, and I will put nails, I believe, that will hold the poles in place, so that they don't just constantly like rotate around facing the weather, because it's going to end up being outside. So so
it's going to hold the poles that have the holes for the poles
it's gonna be
out in the cold.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a limerick that I think we're going to be able to build off of this.
Well, we can make it the title.
Yes.
The title of the piece.
I love long titles. The title of the piece will be an entire limerick. That's
great. I'm into it. Yeah.
I'm all about that. I want to try to. I'm gonna try something right now. Because I really love all this discussion that we've been having about the technical stuff, but we left some good stuff about obvious behind that I want to start bringing in. So about like obvious and perspective and how things can be completely divergent and things like that. I want to ask you, for you, like, what's some stuff that is completely obvious to you that other folks still don't get it? And you're like, how do you not see this? Obviously.
Wow.
Like, it's okay if it's Monday. It's okay if it's like, ketchup is disgusting and I don't know how everyone else likes it. It's okay if it's something like that.
I love ketchup. I mean, if you want to go with the most obvious thing, I would say the election right now is, a lot of people find one candidate the more obvious choice than the other candidate. And so,
Is it always like that in your experience? I'm trying to think back into like presidential things, because presidential things are always like created or meant to be diametrically opposed. Do you feel like the because I know this year is very, very super polarized, but is it usually pretty obvious to each group that this person makes sense?
Well, if you think about like when Obama ran against McCain, I feel like McCain has like they both are, you know, rather they're candidates that have a lot of integrity. Mm-hmm. So I think that was more just based on your own personal preference and background and situation, whether you're liberal or conservative. Because like if there had been a McCain presidency, like I don't think it would have been the end of the world. He probably would have been an all right president, honestly, but he wasn't. It didn't pan out, and we had Obama, which was great. I love Obama. So yeah, I think that particular election, like I would have been all right with either result. Like I would have preferred Obama, but like it would have been okay if McCain had been president, right? This particular election is a little different. Or a lot different. I think I lost you.
Oh,
wait.
You lost us out. Yeah, we lost us for a second, but you came back. Okay. Yeah, we blinked out, but we're back. It's all good. No, what's interesting, it's like what you're saying, it's like, it's not even about the strong preference thing. It's about like the idea that it's like, well, it's completely obvious my guy. And when you're saying like with McCain, and it's funny because I thought about Romney very similarly, that because Romney and Obama were very similar candidates, even in terms of their policy. Yeah. And it brings us all the way back to the first word of the museum with hypocrite. And there are a lot of people who, when specifically McCain, right, when it came to identity, there were people who said, women, you're all about women. If you were a feminist, how are you not going to vote for this guy who has nominated a woman to be his vice president? Right. And, it's obvious to us that people are hypocrites about their thing for not fitting into this identity portion of it rather than the policy portion of it. Right. Yes, for sure. Yeah. It's just, and so McCain, his running mate, obviously was, what's her name? Oh God, I can't think of her name. Helen, yes. Yeah. And, it's like, I'm all for having a woman president someday. That would be amazing. I voted for Hillary, and, but Palin was a little questionable. Like, she was not the ideal choice for our first woman president. So, I mean, yeah, you kind of have to look at all your different values and how they converge. And sometimes you have to pick just which values are more important to you and support those values. Yeah, I love it because it's the obviousness of things. It comes from repetition, right? Mm-hmm. Obviousness comes from hearing things too many times. And the thing about that is, while it is a strong way of learning, it obliviates nuance, right? Mm-hmm. It blows that whole thing out of the water. Because you were just talking about like, okay, well, you personally felt like, well, I'd like to see a woman running things, but maybe not that one. And while that is true of you and your personal stuff, that's also the thing that I remember. Here's a good random one. Saturday Night Live didn't have enough. They were like, there's like no black women who are on Saturday Night Live. And there were Saturday Night Live cast members who were like, well, maybe there just aren't any good ones. So, like, not that one. They made the same argument, right? They're like, I would love to have women, but not that one. And it's like, well, but it's the same argument. And then how do we get there? And the reason I'm throwing all of this out here and it's being good and messy is that's the point of our job as artists, right? Sure. Yeah. Our whole thing is to like take those confusing places all over the place and start making translations. Right. It might not be very obvious to you, but I've decided to do such with a very literal method of digging into words and their etymology and where they come from. I started making art because I saw conversations, or I was part of conversations that didn't work. And I go home, and like you turn away from a conversation that went really poorly, you embarrass yourself, it looks stupid, or just make it worse. And in your head, you're making that new conversation. That's what I think art comes from. It's like, you're fixing the world, rewinding time in your head. And for mine, it was often about things escalating to fighting when they needed to be conversations. Yeah. What is the rewinding that you do with your art? What are the things that you're fixing?
Well, I mean, I think that comes back to like, for a very recent example, like this logo situation. Like I tend to kind of just overthink everything, and then I can't end up making any decisions. So like I'm like thinking, oh, I need to try this like 800 ways, and then it's just like too overwhelming. And then I end up asking people and getting like other people to kind of give me input as to what's best, because I can no longer see what's best. And then sometimes them telling me what they think is best makes me see what's best, even though it's not what they said they think is best. Because then I'm kind of like rooting for a different direction that I went with. And you know that it doesn't just apply to logos. It applies to everything, anything creative really. So yeah, it's really part of everything. But I'm definitely an overanalyzer and an overthinker and an overmaker, because I feel like everything just isn't good enough. But then sometimes you have to come back to that idea of sometimes done is better than perfect.
Yeah, well, the artists never finish; they just give up.
Something like that. Yeah.
At some point, you just got to be like, that.
Exactly.
And look at that.
Right. Yes.
Well, we talked about the passing thing and reverse engineering from the right? So how do you know when you're done?
Sometimes there's a deadline, and it has to be done. Sometimes, it's you get to the point, because so sometimes I've overdone things, and like sometimes you're at a point where it's like, oh, this feels done. Let me just do this other thing, and let me add this other thing, and then you end up ruining it. So you kind of have to go by your own intuition as to when it feels done, but not, like I don't want to ruin this thing. I just did Inktober. Every year there's Inktober, so you do a drawing a day for 30 days, and I definitely like overdid some of those, because it's like I had like this really cool idea going in, and then I ended up adding to it. And like one really good example is I did a horseshoe, and I inked the horseshoe, and then I was like, okay, this looks cool. Maybe I should put like good luck inside the horseshoe. So then I did like a really cool, like written out good luck typography, handwritten thing. And when I inked that, and then I didn't wait long enough to erase my pencil lines, and I ended up ruining the entire thing. It's like, what the horseshoe was fine by itself. So then I had to go in. I have like this Dr. Martin's is an ink company. They have like this black white paint. It's not really paint. It's just like, I don't know. I use it to cover up mistakes, and I ended up basically like all the white space in that is kind of like that. So I didn't totally lose it, but I could have been done hours sooner than I was, because I felt like, oh, I needed to add something to this,
So you added a little thing that basically made it so that you had to do it twice.
Pretty much, yes.
I dig it. So I want to expand that into, because you were talking about all the different mediums that you rock on, right?
Yeah.
And all these other things, and build things, and like, so in that process, carry me a little bit through that intuitive process about how you decide what stuff to use.
I think it's kind of because I actually like make money with creative stuff. Like that's how my bread and butter. A lot of times it's decided by the client. And, a lot of times it's just like, if it's a personal project, it'll be more, well, what do I like to work with? And so like, for example, this stop motion studio that I'm doing, like when I went to college, what I wanted to do was basically be Michel Gondry. And so I wanted to do music videos, and I wanted to do like a lot of analog effects, like in-camera effects, as well as stop motion, kind of all incorporating this experimental aesthetic. And I went so far as to do my internship with his brother. I interned with Olivier Gondry, and it was amazing. But since I graduated, so I graduated and I graduated with like $70,000 in student loans because art school is expensive. And I had a BFA, and like, it's intimidating. So for the longest time, I was paying like $1,000 a month in student loans, living in New York, paying exorbitant rent here. And I felt trapped, like I couldn't actually make my art for a really long time because I was, just had a couple experience out of school. And it took a while to kind of get my rate up to, a comfortable level when you're paying that much in student loans as well as rent and living expenses and all that. So, now that I have 16 years of experience, it's not such a burden anymore. But I feel like at this point, I've wasted so much time not doing the stuff that I wanted to do, that this is my chance with the pandemic, not having any work right now, to kind of focus my efforts on building the studio and hopefully dedicating more of my creative ambitions into a specific genre that I'd like to pursue more. And I still want to be a music video director. I still want to be Michelle Gondry. It's just a matter of, making that work, putting the efforts that, as opposed to survival, because I was in survival mode before. And you have to pay that much money and you don't have that much experience. You're just working, and getting as much money as you can so you can keep up with your expenses. And now it's like, okay, now I want to, divert my efforts into the thing I always wanted to do.
Wow. Man, this is just like the way of artists, right?
It is.
I love what you said. I went to school to get some training.
Yeah.
I took a loan and got up in the system so I could pay money back. I went to the place where it is expensive so I could get the experience. I've spent more than a decade getting experience, and all of this work is just getting me to the point where maybe now someone will let me work.
Exactly. It's nuts. Like, it's insane because, I feel like people who are very talented and creative and should be doing what they want to be doing, they're just so overburdened by things like debt that it wasn't explained to them when they were 18 years old. Oh, hey, when you're going to graduate, you're going to have to pay this much money every month. So you can pretty much forget about pursuing what you want to actually, what you're actually here for many years. So it's really messed up. America and its education system and the expense of it is a bit much. So yeah, hopefully this next generation of kids will have better funding and everything. But like, I feel like Xennials and Millennials kind of took the brunt of it, the education system being so expensive, and we're just not going to get any relief for it because, we're already in the age group that is either close to paying it off or has paid it off, and they're not going to give us a refund. So they're not going to be like, oh, you paid so I ended up paying back $140,000 for, it's double what I initially took out. And that would be a nice down payment for a house. But guess what? I just don't have that money.
I mean, some parts of the country, $144,000, that's like the entire
house.
Yeah, you just have the house. And you're
not in New York, but yeah.
That's down payment. Yeah, that's sort of.
It's down payment here, yeah. But it's kind of ridiculous because it's like that money's just gone forever, and most of it's interest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, half of it is interest. So yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine having a child right now and being like, oh, you're gonna have a lot of money to owe in the future, assuming you want to go to college.
Yeah, Pam and I just had a kid, and we've been having that kind of conversation and then worry about that and where it needs to be. So we've been talking for a minute. We should probably start wrapping up. Oh, this nice dog.
Sure. I know. I was saying hi to the
dog. New York is still going on, but I wanted to wrap up talking more. We could talk for a while about the money part. Pam and I, we have our whole conversation about and stuff like that. But I want to talk a little bit more before we go about the work that you're doing in your studio. I would like for folks who are listening who could possibly be funding or pitching to you projects. What are we going to see? What are you going to do? If you don't have stuff ready for it, make it up and let us know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, so like my portfolio, my personal portfolio has some of the stop motion work that I've done in the past. I've done music videos. I've done some stop motion for Oxygen, the network, and Food Network. Sorry, there's a bug. And so I'm hoping to get more music videos. The problem with music videos is they tend to not pay what I need to survive. And so that's one of my big concerns with setting up the studio is a lot of times when people reach out to me about a stop motion project, their budget is like severely not anywhere close to what it needs to be for what they want to do. And sometimes they'll be like, well, we can take that budget and do this, but then it's like, nope, like my suggestion is nowhere close to what they want, say a 10-minute whatever, that's very complicated, and they have like a budget of like $500, and it's like, there's stop motion takes forever, come on. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to kind of get enough of the clients that have a decent budget and who understand what goes into stop motion in order to be able to make this work, in a robust, survivable way.
I love that. So what it sounds like, I love that. It's my teacher voice. Like, oh, that sounded kind of dour. And I'm like, I love that. No, I love that because it sounds like a great problem for artists to solve. You should rock with Elizabeth Starkey. She's got dope works. We're doing work together on Obvious, and she creates these wonderful stop motion pieces, wants to help you on your music video thing. And how can we figure out how to make these things, obviously, make money for both of us?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's actually a new, I don't know if you're familiar with the website Working Not Working. It's kind of it's mostly for ad creatives in the ad industry, but it's not just restricted to that. It's for creatives looking for work, and they post full-time jobs as well as freelance gigs. And they have a new service that I can't remember the name of, but they launched like a week ago, and I reached out to them. What they're doing is they're kind of acting like your sales team for you, which is awesome. They take like 20% of your total fee, but if they can get me a decent amount of money for a project, then it's worth it, I guess. Because that's the part I hate is like talking to clients and like negotiating and feeling like, oh, they're trying to take advantage of me. Like if somebody else does all that, awesome. Like I just want to make the cool stuff and be able to survive while I'm doing it, and hopefully grow and expand and become like this cool little company that people come to for quirky music videos and like content and, bumpers. Like, remember the old MTV bumpers and like the old Nickelodeon bumpers from like the 90s? I love that. I'd love to do that.
Broke is coming to you with $50 asking for a full 3.5-minute video. Woke is figuring out how to do things together in a different way. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like back in the day, they told you DIY, right? You got to do it yourself. Mm-hmm. You have the musician and the video director and the marketing person, and you got to fill up the gift bags at your fundraiser party for everybody, and you're performing and you're hosting. And now what's obvious to us is that if you want to build something that's sustainable, you got to have a team. That sounds really big.
You really do. Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You should probably shut it on that. We've been talking for a minute here. This is great stuff.
Totally.
Elizabeth Starkey, come check out the work that she's doing here with Museum of Dead Words. And thank you.
Thank you.
That's our perspective on the word obvious. Please feel free to check us out tomorrow, where we're going to have Kristen doing her thing. I'm going to share the screen again with the epitaphs, where she's going to be doing her memory scape. So you can check out the memory stakes in progress. This is the one that she did with me. It's really See you guys next time. Thank you for checking out what we're doing with the Museum of Dead Words.